Welcome, everyone. Today is May 28th, and we're so happy to be with you for another Let's Grow Kids online real-time training that we've titled Change is Hard. Change Management Can Help. Perspectives from HR and programs on navigating the new normal. I'm Brenda Metzler, one of the community and program support specialists on the programs team at Let's Grow Kids. And for today's training, as the title suggests, we'll discuss change management processes, tools, and techniques that you can use to manage the people side of changes. So lots of good stuff. We'll have about 30 minutes to hear from our panelists and then about 25 minutes for them to answer your questions. And today we're really happy to be joined by Erika Schramm, leadership coach and HR consultant from Skylight Coaching and Consulting, Angela Earl Gray, HR consultant at Adaptiva HR, Stephanie Carvey, director and teacher at Rekaroo's Childcare, Lawrence Miller, consultant of Five Vine Consulting LLC, and my colleague Trey Martin, who is legal counsel at Let's Grow Kids. As usual, we're all recording from our home with children, animals, and internet of varying reliability, and sometimes we have technical glitches. Thankfully, I think we got those worked out at the beginning here. But don't worry, we can't see you, and you're muted. So a few of the usual reminders. Please use the Q&A for your questions. So put yours in the little box at the bottom that says Q&A, and that allows us to record your questions, and then we can add them to our FAQ sheet, which we post. And we'll use the chat to drop in any links. So every time we reference a resource that has a link, we'll put it in the chat box. Today is approved for Northern Lights, and to have this hour count, you should have registered with your BFIS number. You have to be on the webinar for the whole hour. If you have questions, contact Ansley at letsgrowkids.org. And as always, check our LGK coronavirus page for updates, the FAQs, and past trainings. And it shows you right here that if you click on the resources for early childhood education programs, there's a place where you can enter your information. There are a lot of resources for early educators and families and employers, but if you want practical strategies or answers to questions that are specific to you, please use our form under resources for early childhood education programs. Today's training offers practical strategies for navigating change as you operate your childcare business, and I'm excited to dive into this discussion. Just a reminder, though, that if you don't hear today what is on your mind, we do have, we know that there are lots of other nitty-gritty things about operating a business. And if you're struggling with a thorny question for your childcare business, Let's Grow Kids has created a new technical assistance program for you where we'll match you with professionals to help you work through any of your business questions, from taxes to legal to HR support. And to access that, just click on the early educator bar as shown in the previous slide. Thank you. Also of note, we're taking off next week, but we plan to offer at least one more of these trainings to support your business needs, and we'll let you know that's going to happen in June. And if you have a topic that's near and dear to your business needs right now, please let us know. Thanks again for joining us. And with that, I think I'm turning it over to Erika Schramm.
Yes, so thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. It's so nice to see so many people on this training, and it also tells me that this is just such an important topic. And it makes sense that it's such an important topic because everything is changing all around us so quickly, and it can often feel so challenging when stuff is changing around us and it feels like we don't have control over what's changing. And so my goal today is to help you recognize that while a lot in the world is changing that we don't have control over, we actually have more control than what we think. And if we can just slow down and take a few minutes, or maybe more than a few minutes, but take the time we need to plan for our changes, we can have much better results overall. So we'll move to the next slide. So it's important to recognize that change is happening all around us. Change is a process. There's the current state that we're in. There's a transition we're moving through, and we're moving through to a future state. And it's so normal to resist change. And so we need to just anticipate and expect that resistance. But most importantly, we need to recognize that when the world is changing around us, we can choose how we lead and respond during times of change. So for the next slide, oftentimes when it feels like everything's changing, we get so foggy in our heads and we feel like we're spinning out of control and we feel like everything is changing and everything is changing quickly. And I wanted to share with you 6 questions that you can ask yourself just to help you slow down and to help you recognize that while a lot is changing, it's just as important to ask yourself and recognize what is not changing, because oftentimes less is changing than what we think. And if we can get a handle on asking ourselves what is changing, why is it changing now, what's not changing, what are the benefits and risks of change, and what are the risks of not changing, we can help ground ourselves and get clear on the changes that we need to manage. And if we are not able ourselves to answer any of those questions, we should take it upon ourselves to get the answers that we need so that we can really understand what is changing and how can we then make a plan to make sure that we are best managing that change. And so on the next slide, the change differently.
Erika, you were broken. You may need to drop your video.
Let's see. Can everyone see me again? Okay. No, I can't see you. Sorry. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. So it's important for us to recognize that if we can develop a plan to meet each of our audience members where they are, we can be more successful in navigating through the change. So if we think about a change, I'll come up with a really simple change. We've decided to change the type of granola bars we're going to buy for our kiddos. The change that has on our families is probably pretty minimal, but it might be helpful to let families know what their kids are eating. So you might just need to let them know. Then let's take the kids. It might be a bigger change for the kids because the kids are used to eating something and we're giving them something else. So we might need to be aware of that impact. Staff might need to know that things are changing, but as long as they have the food they need to give to their kids, it's not that big of a deal. And regulators probably don't need to know. So it's important to recognize that's for a really little simple change, that the audiences all respond differently, and therefore the way we meet their needs is different. And if we think about a change that's much more substantive, we can see how the impact on different people is so different. And so once we've identified what's changing and how is it going to impact the different people that we interact with, we then get the opportunity to make our plans. And so Ansley, on the next slide, thank you. There's a way to think about change management, and it's an acronym, and it's called the ADKAR model. ADKAR stands for the words that you see on the left. So often when something is changing, we immediately jump to making sure we communicate the change and we give people the training and resources they need to lead through that change. And then we experience resistance and we're saying, well, I don't understand why. I had such a good plan. I explained the change and I gave people training. We need to make sure up front that we are making our plans to help people become not only aware of the change, but help bring them along so that they want to make the change happen. Consider it your ad campaign, your awareness desire campaign. What do you need to do for each of your audience members to make sure that they are not only aware of what's changing and why it's changing, but that they come on board so that they want to make the change happen, that they understand what's in it for them, that they understand what choices they have, so that they choose to be a part of the change. And if you can't get them there, you need to keep trying, because if you skip over that step, chances are they're going to resist and make things harder for you in the long run. And so once you've identified how you can make them, bring them along in the change, then you help them understand how they can change. What are the training and resources they need? What are the tools they need so they can change? Once they've demonstrated that they can change, you help reinforce that behavior. How can you reward and recognize and continue to celebrate all the great stuff that you're seeing so that they will continue to sustain that change? And so just think for a moment about changes that you're going through and how you might be able to bring people from awareness to desire, and then provide them with the knowledge they need so that they can do it. And then you can reinforce that change. And as you're thinking about that, it's so important as you're navigating change, not only that you follow a process, but that you really focus on the communication skills you need to make that change successful, that you recognize that changes have emotional and behavioral and cognitive impacts. And I'm so excited to introduce Angela, who will have an opportunity to take the process that we just introduced and help you understand the best practices to actually navigate through those changes from a cognitive, behavioral, and emotional perspective. So Angela.
Thanks. And as Erika said, there really are three components of change. Cognitive. Do you understand why a change is needed, what change is needed, and the steps that you're going to take to put it in place? Behavioral, are you changing all the behaviors you need to for the change to happen? But then there's the emotional, right? There's times that we all understand changes are needed and are willing to go along with it because we see the benefit of it, but it doesn't mean that we feel emotionally wonderful about forging forward to that path. There's something you lose when you change. If you move forward to the next slide, change itself is one of the top stressors in the workplace. Too much too soon, change that happens without control, right? Erika gave you, this is the ideal to do when you can. Recently, we've all been having changes that are out of most of our control. There are legislative changes that are making us change things more quickly than is ideal, and we know it. So there's a huge amount of stress there. Random interruptions, how much of our day-to-day work is being interrupted with new surprising things we weren't expecting to have to be thinking about and working on. If there is any mistrust, any sense that there's been unfairness or a lack of clarity on what's going on, that adds to stress. And again, when things get rolled out and are brand new and are being rolled out quickly, it's really easy for people to have the best of intents, but not necessarily have had time to vet everything to the point where we're sure that there's not any places that it could be misinterpreted. And again, a lot of the legislative pieces. Something comes out, people do the best they can to interpret it. They ask a lot of questions. All of a sudden they find out the interpretations aren't quite right as new clarification comes out and adjustments need to be made. And for staff people or parents or the kids themselves, it seems like there's a lack of consistency of what's being asked, and that can be really frustrating. A lack of career and job ambiguity. How many people are feeling that these days? No feedback. It can be easy as we're focused on doing sort of the behavior pieces of change to have some of the communication drop out because we're so busy doing the work that we need to that we're forgetting to do some of those let's debrief and how is this change working for everyone. No appreciation. Hopefully you guys are getting a lot of appreciation because you deserve it. And hopefully you're giving each other a lot of appreciation because you deserve it. But again, times people are stressed and frustrated. Sometimes that can be something that you have to work to consciously remember. And again, lack of or poor communication. And even the people who are on site together, right? The fact that we're staying further apart, the fact that shifts are getting changed, all of those things just add to a really stressful period for everyone involved in the changes that are happening in your organization. And there's all sorts of emotions that go along with it, right? And some of them are exciting. Some of it is, this is a great change, and you know, my kids are going to be home and I'm going to get to homeschool them, and what an amazing opportunity, and I'm thrilled about it, and I'm scared to death, and I'm overwhelmed. And so I think that the big thing to think of in terms of emotional impact is everyone has a lot of mixed emotions right now. And there are times people are feeling one way, and there are times people are feeling another way. So at the same time, it's some of the most important times to be communicating. Not everyone can engage and hear that communication and process that information in the same way that they would if it was a less volatile time. So repetitive communication, communicating multiple channels, saying things more than once becomes really important. Going forward. Can we go to the next slide? Thanks. So again, stages of change. Denial, shock, fear, anger, frustration, you know, all the things that I'm not sure if I want this to be happening and I don't know how I feel about it. Before you get to the acceptance, hope, all of those pieces. But remember that if you're in an environment where lots of changes are going on, you're not necessarily in the same part of the cycle about all of those changes. You know, there are some things that you've gotten used to and you feel a sense of hope and we've accomplished this one and we feel good, but there are the next changes coming along that are the next things that you're a little bit nervous about or mad that you have to do. And that's true of everyone that's interacting with you. And the other thing to look at with these stages of change, right, is they're very similar to the stages of grief. There are certain things that we lose in change that it's pretty natural to mourn and really have to process as a loss. To the next one. So this is a quote. When I was researching this, I will be honest and say I read a blog post, and this was just a random guy, David's response to this blog post. And he said, so you're basically saying communicate early, often, multiple channels, with as much transparency as you can, as possible, even when it makes you feel vulnerable. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that because as a leader, you being willing to be vulnerable is something that's really important. So strategic tips, you know, be flexible, be as flexible as you can, be sensitive to the fact that people are having a hard time emotionally. If there are some things that are usually rigid rules and people want something different, again, you've been doing it. You know, be open to that human communication, and as people express needs, is there a way we can make this happen? Something I like to do when I'm trying to decide whether or not someone is asking for something that's reasonable is argue both sides of it. If I was going to go into a meeting and say we should do this for this person, what would be the reasons I think we should be flexible? And then if I was going to go into the same meeting and take the counterpart, what are the reasons I would say, no, we shouldn't do that and we can't do that? And a lot of times it comes down to equity and being worried that if I say yes to one person, I'm going to put myself in a position where I have to say yes to everyone. And that's a valid thing to be thinking about, but also be realistic about, you know, how likely is that everyone's going to ask, and is there a way you can explain it or frame it, or find a middle compromise where maybe you're not being as flexible as someone would hope, but at least you're not rigidly holding them to what you would have asked a few weeks ago. And that's another way to do it. Again, adjusting expectations goes along with being flexible. It's really a time to be going, what are the core things that are needed from this person? What are the core things that are needed from this process? And can we accept just that in the short term? And again, it's about communication, because you might be able to accept it in the short term, but not in the long term. And you just want to be clear and make sure people understand. Again, prioritizing the communication. Oh, I'm going to have to mute for a moment soon. I apologize. I'm having an animal emergency. All right, we're done. Thank you for being flexible with me there. So again, prioritizing communication. A lot of organizations aim to say, you know, your supervisor is always available to you. Your supervisor has an open door. How realistic is that right now? People who are in supervisory positions sort of have a lot of people lined up at their door and a lot of people that they're communicating with. And it can make it hard for employees who are having something that's really critical to them to feel like there's a path to say, I need one-on-one time. So really think about how you can provide a path for people to flag you if they need your attention and they need extra communication. And then just leading and role modeling. You know, again, things are changing so fast, there is a good chance that somewhere along the line you've done something and looked back and gone, whoops, that wasn't the right way to manage this change. And the times that happen, you know, own up to it, admit it, talk through it, process it, figure out the direction you're going and head in that direction. And again, you know, your own vulnerability, your own acknowledging that, yep, I was thinking about that in a different way. This change is hard on me too. You know, it is having an emotional impact on all of us. If you do have any resources like EAPs, things that you can refer to your employees to, so they're helping to give that support as well, that's another great thing to do. And again, make sure you're taking care of your own mental health, being willing to be authentic, transparent, vulnerable, all of the things that you want your staff to be, because you want to know where they really are. You want to be showing them that it's okay and safe to be that way. And now, while we have been talking about theoretical, I'm going to actually pass it to somebody who's been doing it in the field to talk a little bit about how it's actually played out in her organization. Stephanie, and then Lawrence is going to be talking with her.
Yeah, so let me just hop in with a couple of things I heard before I asked Stephanie to kick off. You know, one of the things I was noting in Erika and Angela's framework presentation is that communication threads through. And what I've done a lot of assessments of businesses and surveys of employees, and I have never seen one where better communication wasn't the #1 request of all employees. So don't beat yourself up. Just remember that all communication happens in the mind of the listener, and everybody learns differently. And so you need to communicate things in different ways and just be patient as people come through it. I'll also observe that we're dealing with a lot of changes that are completely beyond our control. We have to make these changes. But for those of you who were here with the session that we did on finding opportunity in crisis, you may have a list of things you want to change as well. And these methodologies work very well for both those things that are put upon you and those things you choose to do. There's a lot more about change management out there. It's a big discipline. There's a lot of knowledge there if you choose to tap it. Stephanie, did you even know that change management was a discipline when you started out on your efforts?
Absolutely not. In fact, I didn't know change management was a thing until I was asked to be on this panel. And after this presentation so far, everybody's right. I have been doing a lot of this stuff.
Great. Could you describe sort of what you were faced with at the beginning of this pandemic and the choices that you wanted to make and how you helped everybody move through them?
Of course. Well, I guess, you know, you start from the beginning when everything started moving south. We did decide to close for just 3 days after the big schools closed. We wanted to do a deep clean. We wanted to kind of wait and see what kind of information was going to be released. And during those 3 days, as Erika said, it seemed like everything was changing, everything at the same time. It was a very stressful time trying to get all that information because I'm the type of person who needs to have the answers. So I can give those answers to anybody else who needs them. So collecting all of that we did decide from the get-go we were going to stay open to whatever capacity we could. We did decide in the end to just focus on children who are already enrolled in our care and not take on additional children as well, especially not knowing where this was going or how long it was going to last. The first week we stayed open, most of my staff stayed on, and during that week staff had to make a lot of tough decisions, and several decided the best choice for them was to stay out of the program until everything blew over. We always were respectful of those choices. I repeatedly said, this is a very personal decision for you to make for you and your families. And we, of course, didn't hold that against them. That was their decision. Thankfully, I had a ton of staff that was still available to work, and they just rolled with the punches. And I love my staff. Shout out to my staff. I couldn't have done it without them. They were there for most of it. I've been working semi-remotely as well as at the center every day, giving my pep talks in the morning, answering questions, but also just staying on top of everything, participating in these webinars. Shout out to all you guys. I learned a lot on the business side of things. It was really critical for me to take in all of that information and learn as much as I could. So I was giving out valid information. In this day and age with media, especially, you're getting a lot of false information, and that can create fear. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be open and honest, but I wanted to have the right answers too. And because of all that prep and all that stress and all of my staff going through everything, we're in a great spot to reopen on Monday with several other programs. So that was really the beginning of everything.
Erika talked a little bit about resistance points in change, thinking about families, kids, staff. What did you run into resistance from folks on anything in particular that you needed to do?
Surprisingly, not as much as I anticipated. Like I said, my staff rolled with the punches and my families rolled with the punches, and everybody was really respectful of the fact that we are all in this together. We were all inventing the wheel as it went. We didn't all have the answers, and I was very honest when I didn't have the answers. The state didn't have the answers. CDD didn't have the answers, and so many people working so hard on the CDD level, and I'm grateful for everything they did. And of course, we would have all loved like a plan going forward, every one of us, but we didn't. And so everybody kind of worked together to stay calm.
Is there anything, having gone through this and helping everybody through these changes, is there anything you learned along the way or anything you took from preparing for this training with us that you would go back and do differently?
Well, I think in retrospect, I wouldn't have done much differently. However, after going through this process with you folks, knowing there is a process, I feel like a chart would have been great for me to sit back on and kind of discuss with members of my management team and those who are making those tough decisions. Even with my staff, I feel sometimes they're just sitting back waiting to be told, but I like to drag them into the process, whether they like it or not. So that was, I don't think I would have done anything differently in this circumstance with COVID. If it was under normal circumstances, having this process under my belt would be great. And for those programs that are just deciding to open, they can still benefit from this process. And it's really about that communication piece and having conversations.
Is there anything about your programs that you think you want to change permanently from this experience?
Well, oddly enough, so during the month of March, I typically go through our handbooks, our parent handbook and our employee handbook. So I had taken those 2 days to be like, oh, I'm going to update my handbook. And there's a lot of policies at the end of all this that I'm going to update and change and add. And they all have to do with the big unknowns. There are always going to be unknowns. You cannot be prepared for everything. And I think being honest about that fact with families and staff from the get-go is really important. So that will be the biggest change I'm going to make going forward.
Well, and that leads to the question of as we all go into this next stage, which involves a different level of risk, albeit starting from a very suppressed viral situation, we may wind up having to take a step back. What have you done to plan and communicate with families about what to do if you have a contact tracing event or anything, or have you gotten to that yet?
I touched on it. I have to be kind of vague with it because our guidance is kind of vague. Every circumstance is going to be different for every program, including ours. So it really depends on the operational standpoint. However, I did put out to my families over the weekend a very long letter, a Facebook post, however I could get it to them, that really broke down how the guidelines are impacting us as a center in particular, what they can expect to see. And at the conclusion of that letter, I put it out there, the worst can still happen. You have to be realistic. In the event that somebody does get sick, even after all our efforts, all our family's efforts, we have to sit back and see what the Vermont Department of Health says. We need to have advice on that. We could be closed from 2 days to over a week. And I have put that out there very specifically to every parent I've contacted in the last 2 weeks. I've done 2 rounds of calls, one last week. I just finished up today with my second round, and making sure that they're aware that that's a possibility and preparing them for that and the unknowns. And everybody's been very receptive to it.
That really speaks to the transparent comment in Angela's quote from David, wherever he is.
And I was actually going to go back to that as Angela focused on that, being transparent. You got to be realistic is how I word it, honest, and think about the worst case scenarios, those ultimate consequences, and be open that those could still happen. And that's why being informed and having all those conversations and being real with everybody is what, in my belief, is pretty much the most important thing through all of this process. Then you can feel like you're as prepared as you can be because you're as honest, and the worst thing that could happen is literally you've already put it out there.
I'm going to switch to asking Eric and Angela if they have any questions before I go to the Q&A. But I have one final question that for your peers on this call. Was there anything you found particularly helpful for yourself in managing your energy and anxiety around running this change process that they might find helpful?
I think being open to suggestions is a big one. Those conversations I keep going back to, and that's especially for my staff. My families, like I said, were very go with the flow. My staff was very go with the flow, but I was very careful not to give them false information. And I wanted to stay informed, but I also needed to take that time. I believe Angela had touched upon it, making boundaries and kind of saying, okay, I am not going to get on a webinar today. I am not going to participate in that Zoom call. I am going to answer those emails tomorrow, and taking that time, especially to really kind of, when you feel yourself getting to that point, you need to stop. It's not worth going there. I can be honest and say I went there. I pushed myself very hard in the last 10 weeks, and I'm getting better at managing that. I think it's a learning process for everybody.
Great, thank you. Erika, do you have anything you want to ask Stephanie or chime in with from your part of the discussion?
I think it's so helpful, Stephanie, just hearing your story and just seeing how you can take the conceptual and bring it into the practical. And I'm just curious, what are you most proud of over the past 3 months?
I'm proud of my staff. I couldn't have done it without them. As I touched upon, I have 2 school agers at home. I've been juggling homeschooling, taking care of my home. My husband is an essential worker who cannot work from home as well. And I've been at my center. I usually work Saturdays to make sure I'm caught up with the administration point of view. But ultimately, at the end of the day, my staff stepped up. They took care of the kids. They followed the guidelines, more like a no questions asked. They just knew this is what we need to do for as long as we need to do it. And I'm so proud of them for having kind of suffered through and trudged along, and they haven't stopped, and they're gung-ho about our opening next week.
Angela?
I don't have any other questions, but I just want to say that I'm really impressed by what you've done, by what you're describing from your staff. And I think in a lot of ways, people in your field are particularly well suited to do a good job of change management, because I think that you see in your work every day the importance of clear communication, the importance of everybody having the same expectations of what's going on, the importance of letting people have a say, even if that's not ultimately going to change the decision. All comes up in your work on such a regular basis that I suspect it's very easy to incorporate into your working with each other as peers.
I definitely would agree within our facility. That is very true, because just so much happens on a regular basis that is like, okay, what do we do? And it's constant. I definitely feel for programs who are just opening, because it's all at once. We, as a program, we've been open this whole time. We've had time to practice everything that's on paper already. There are some things that will be new challenges even for us as we reopen to more families, but coming from fresh into that, it's intimidating. And I think it's important to reach out to your supports, reach out to your networks, talk with them, see what other people are doing. I definitely didn't make some of these decisions blindly or just with my staff. I referred to other programs. Hey, what are you guys doing? Hey, what are you doing? And everybody's going to be a little bit different, but I think everybody working together can help one another. And I hope that as a support, because I've been open, that I've been able to help some people make the right decisions and feel more comfortable about reopening to everybody.
Very cool. Thank you.
Thank you so
Right.
much. I'm really grateful to have every one of you here today. And I'm going to let Trey lead off with some questions, and then he and I will probably tag team it for Q&A.
Well, and before we have one really good question in that I want to pose, it not for any particular panelist. It might be Stephanie or Angela or Lawrence or Erika who can answer this, or maybe all of you. Before I do that, I want to invite everyone who's participated. There are a lot of you out there today. I'm going to be quiet for about 20, 30 seconds now and let you think about what your questions might be. And you can write it to me and Brenda as, hey, this is a question for Lawrence, or this is a question for Erika or for Stephanie, or you can just pose a question and we'll get to it. So let me pause for 1 second and let people do that, and then we'll start organizing some of the ones that come in. Okay, I realize 30 seconds is not enough time to type a 250-word question or a really a thoughtful comment. So you may still be doing that. While you are, here's a topic that has come up. It's been a thread throughout our conversations on these Thursday webinars, and it is certainly very near and dear to everyone who's participating today. And it was anticipated by Lawrence's first comment as he picked up the mic from Erika and Angela, which is, how do you manage change when it's change you don't agree with, or it's change that you feel is being forced upon you, or it's change that's being implemented in a way that you don't have any chance to shape. So for a lot of providers out there, the allowance, I wouldn't say it's an order to reopen on June 1st, but the allowance to reopen on June 1st feels like an order or a directive, because the support program, the stabilization program, as well as the provision for CCFAP reimbursement based on enrollment rather than attendance, is changing. And so programs are being told, you may reopen on June 1st if you want. You may avail yourselves of a restart grant to help with some of the costs of reopening. But if you don't, you're not going to be getting the supports that you were having. So people don't feel like they have a choice. And yet the choice to reopen for some people feels dangerous. It might feel dangerous for the directors who are on this call and business managers. It might feel dangerous to some of their staff, and it might feel dangerous to some of their parents. So how do you manage that process with your staff and your families? Or how would you all recommend managing those conversations and that process with staff and families when there are folks out there who may disagree with the option that they have to take?
Sure, I can speak to it a little bit. So I've done HR for a very long time, and I've done it in a distributed management company where there are a lot of voices that are contributing to decisions. And there have been many, many times I've been put in a position of needing to implement something that I didn't personally agree with. And the times that happens, I think it's important to let people voice their disagreement. I think it's okay to voice your own disagreement. You know, again, you don't want to be inciting rebellion, but to say it's not the decision I would have made. If I had a choice, I would be doing it differently. And then looking at the factors that the decision makers did take into account and saying, I think from their perspective, X, Y, and Z, you know, and we are choosing to listen and go along with it because. So, you know, again, it might be better if everyone could be receiving childcare in the home, but we've moved to a stage of reopening where that's not going to occur. And there are some families that really need this service and support. So even though I don't think it's ideal to be moving forward, we've made a commitment to keeping the business going. And what that means right now is complying with these things. And this is how we're going to do it and move forward. And at the same time, encouraging people to give their feedback, not just to you, but share it directly with decision makers. You know, I know that there was a letter that was written to the governor, many letters written to the governor, encouraging political advocacy and saying, you know, we are in this place together where this is what we have to work with, and here are the options available to us. Let's make it the best we can within the framework of those options.
I think Stephanie led in with something that was really important related to staff. Is she said she accommodated people who on staff who had particular concerns. And I think that's really important. If you have people that work with you, or if you have any conditions that make you more vulnerable, and that would include being over 65, COPD, diabetes, liver disease, a variety of conditions that are available on the Department of Health website. You know, those raise different issues, and each person in that situation should have a conversation with their own healthcare provider before making a decision about going back to work. That's really important. I think the transparency around these issues, as Angela said, is really important, and that may mean setting some terms under which you would make a decision about your program even before the state does. Right now, we are at a point of an extremely low viral load in the state. There's very little community transmission at all. We have a 49-week doubling rate at this point. The only thing that wigs me out is the people coming in from out of state, because everything else is so well done by Vermonters in terms of doing what needs to be done. It's in really good shape. And we have the capacity needed to do contract tech tracing if there's testing. But being able to say, here's what the trade-offs are. We're low now. If we go high, we're going to need to make changes. That's really important. You might decide that you want to monitor the positive, the percentage of positive cases relative to number of tests done. If that goes over 5%, the state is going to immediately make changes. But you might want to watch that number so that you're a little bit better, more ahead. And finally, I think there is that balance between physical safety and developmental needs, and that is a real dynamic. You know, my kids are grown now, but that contact time with other kids growing up in a rural community was incredibly important for them from a developmental perspective. And so those are trade-offs, and identifying what those trade-offs are so that your families and your staff can think through those, I think, is the most valuable thing you can do and is ethically sound. And that sharing where you fall on your understandings of those trade-offs, that's transparent, and to me that's appropriate. I hope that helped.
I would add one thing to that. As a former classroom teacher and center director, I also, we say this all the time, and I think we can just continue to practice this. And the thing is that we will figure it out as we go along. All of us have said we don't know everything right now, and because of the nature of the pandemic, we can't know. And that's, we have to, that's real. So, because we can't manage it, all we can do is figure it out as we go along. So for me, a part of that is sort of letting go of being the grown-up in the room who can know. Like, I'm the grown-up in the room, but I can't know, so I have to figure it out as I go along. And we're going to figure it out as we go along together.
So before we move on, Stephanie or Erika, no need to chime in here, but if there's anything you want to add before we shift topics slightly, welcome any further thoughts. To some really good discussion. I want to thank Angela and Lawrence and Brenda for all really, I think, spot on responses.
Yeah, I think just acknowledging that managing a change that you don't fully agree with is one of the hardest things you'll do, especially when you are trying to be authentic and transparent and vulnerable. It just stinks. And so just acknowledging and accepting that it doesn't feel good all the time. And at the same time, the questions that I shared to help you get clear can also be really helpful to help you identify what are the benefits and risks of changing, so that at least you have information to ground you in how you navigate and manage the change. And the questions that we shared will be shared with all participants after the session. Just acknowledging it's hard. And so I don't want to sugarcoat how challenging it really is for everybody.
And I'll piggyback on what several of you have probably kind of said in different ways. Is I'm a devil's advocate. I try and read both sides, no matter what the situation, whether it's something coming down or something coming up. I try and see both sides of the situation. And there are times where I am stuck in a spot where there's a policy that needs to be made or something coming down from even higher up, and I don't agree with it. And sometimes you just need to go along with it and see what kind of information comes out on the long run. And the worst part is you change it on a regular basis anyway. Maybe not right now. Right now, we just have to kind of do what we need to do. And I think that's why everybody's so flexible right now, is everybody understands that it's either we're flexible or we don't have these options.
Great, thank you. We move on to another question here, but I want to also let folks know that if you have questions about anything that we've covered on prior webinars too, it's something that's sort of related to the topic today, feel free to pose those as well as we finish up. We have about 10, 12 more minutes here to go, and we do have some questions pending, but if there's anything burning on your mind, pose it, and if we don't get to it, then we can try to respond in writing later. In the meantime, here's a quick question for, I think it's for Brenda, and I don't know if we know the answer directly, but we'll get back to you if we don't. If somebody's operating a center within a school building, how do they find out more information about whether, when it's going to be opened up and when they can get back to go? Is that mandated for every, school district by the Agency of Education, or is it district by district?
So I don't have a clear answer. My understanding is, but you should definitely check with the Agency of Education. So when programs are in a public school or in a K through higher grade school, they have a relationship and or some kind of agreement with that supervisory union or that school district. So those are the people you'll need to talk to determine how to move forward with your program. And supervisory unions have been making their own decisions about how to proceed. And I'm not sure if that's going to be something that is allowed to sort of play itself out, or if in fact the Agency of Education is making a statement that will apply to everyone. So when we have more clarity around that, we will post it in the FAQ.
And Lawrence may have another thing to add here quickly. It looks like he's
Well,
nodding.
just for perspective, it's not that all school buildings are closed. In fact, many schools across the state are operating their normal school feeding program just for non-congregate delivery to the home. So many of those buildings are open and in use. They're just not available for classroom education at the secondary level. So I would expect that as a tenant, you would be able to use your space.
Thank you.
And
Thank
here's
you.
oh, sorry.
Well, go ahead, Brenda.
I was just going to say, here's a question for Stephanie. Stephanie, were your employees who decided they weren't comfortable working let go, or do they get their job back when the time is right for them?
They are all coming back to me tomorrow for a nice 2-hour training to get ready for next week. I think I only have one staff member out of the tons that I have that will not be returning for the time being because they fall, or actually two technically, who fall into the category of high risk. And I have explained based off these webinars that until they talk to their own healthcare providers and possibly our liability insurance, we should probably just go with the flow, and they're okay with that. But I'm very happy to give my staff their jobs, but I can't do it without them.
And my recommendation for businesses that are accommodating employees who do have vulnerabilities or are caring for somebody with a vulnerability or have a student in school, or all of these things, is to do your best to hire somebody who can be a temporary to fill that position and be in a position to bring that person back when they're available. I think that's, the right thing to do under these kinds of circumstances, but it is hard when after a while you get bonding between a caregiver and a set of kids. And, so that may not be able to be something you can do on an open-ended basis, but think about it.
Before we leave this one, I would say, add on something and invite Angela or Lawrence, who've talked about this previously. There are a variety of different tools to support that are available right now. The state and federal unemployment benefits may be benefits that employees who were furloughed or chose to to sort of furlough themselves because of COVID-19 to enter into the unemployment insurance pool. There are also federal Families First Act tax credits that you can avail yourself of as a business organization if you have been supporting employees who fit into a variety of different categories, but that includes people who've been caring for somebody who's sick or quarantined, people who are sick and quarantined themselves, or people who have to be out of work because they are caring for a child under 18 who doesn't have school or childcare. So there are a lot of different ways that your employees might be not with you right now. And there are a number of different scenarios at play there. And I would encourage anybody who's thinking about how to bring people back online or what to do about that, if you have a very individualized question, to send that in on our web form, or to send it to Ansley and Brenda and me as an email if you want. And if we think it's, sort of a tricky enough question, we can set up a time for you to talk individually with Angela or Lawrence or the folks at Downs Racklin, who can help kind of navigate some of those more tricky, what do I do in my very specific personal situation.
Can I just add, Trey, to what Lawrence had to say? A lot of it is about how much trust you have established with someone. Like Lawrence said, you don't want to do a blanket no matter what happens, no matter how long you're out of the workplace, no matter what we do to replace you, we're always going to let you come back no matter what. Because you might be in a position, months from now that just budget or whatever's going on in the world means that can't happen. But if you're regularly expressing appreciation and gratitude and having good working relationships with your staff and saying to them, you bring things of to value to this job every single day. And of course, if I'm able to bring you back on board, I'm going to do that. If you've established trust and you have a good relationship, they're going to have a lot of faith in you saying that, hopefully.
Thank you for that, Angela. There's a practical question that has been on so many people's minds over these past weeks. And I'm going to direct it to you, Stephanie, because you can speak to it specifically about your program and then just maybe follow it up with some other opportunities. So the question is, how are you getting the supplies that you need to operate?
And that is a very good question, because a month ago, I would have been in the same panic boat as everybody else, because at the beginning, I was literally going to Walmart at 7 a.m. at least 3 times a week to get like 1 gallon of bleach. And I've been thankful toilet paper I have for probably the next year, because my family's donated during that first week. So that was awesome. But right now, everything is kind of being replenished. I went to Hannaford's the other day for my own personal grocery shopping at 6 p.m. and there was bleach and toilet paper on the shelf still. So I think everybody will be happy to know it might be a little easier for those types of things to find what you need. I think some of the challenging items still are gloves, which is something that we're going to be using a lot of. And at the detriment of you guys not taking all the supplies off of Amazon, look into the food service gloves. You get way more per order. They are kind of flimsy, but you're using them for like temperature checks and diaper changes. I'm doing sunscreen with separate ones now as well. But they work and they're cheap and they're doable. So you have to be creative in your resources. And just keep an eye out on all of your, like the LGK Facebook page. Like somebody put out a Whoop thing the other day and I was able to get a new thermometer. I was able to get another thermometer within a week turnaround sent to me. So that was something that was unheard of a month ago. I think it's getting better. I use Foley Distributing out of Rutland. They've been a fantastic advocate for childcare and they deliver. WB Mason as well has a much better stock now. I think the only challenge for everybody is possibly raised prices, and that is going to be the downfall of everything. Accessibility, better price. Yeah, we'll see how it goes.
Thank you, Stephanie. Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you to all the panelists. We're coming to the end of the program time. So I wonder if do people have a last word that they would like to finish with before we sign off? Lawrence, you raised your hand and Erika is unmuted, which seems to be the signal of the current day. My time to talk to. So Lawrence, then Erika, and then Angela and Steph, if you have anything more you want to say.
You know, I think one of the things that I just want to be really clear with this group about is that, you know, I cringe every time I hear the notion that the purpose of keeping the child centers open was so that people could go back to work. That's a component. As somebody who believes and has worked as the Secretary of Commerce in the state, I believe that early childhood education is a critical long-term, multi-generational economic development play. That's where I feel it fits, because it improves people's lives for their entire life to experience high quality early childhood education. And I want you to hear that. You guys are doing fantastic work. We're incredibly proud of what you have come through, especially people who have been able to serve the children of essential workers through this period. But I don't want you to hear that all the policymakers just think it's about taking care of parents who need to go back to work. We're here to support you because we're very, very grateful and impressed with what you do for our kids every day. Thanks.
Thank you for saying it like that, because like he said, it's so much more than just allowing parents to go to work. It's about the development. It's about kids learning more before we ship them off to the grade school. It's there's so much more to it. So thank you.
One thing posted, resource posted in the Q&A, if you didn't see it, you can call your supermarket. I didn't know this. You can call your supermarket and tell them that you're an essential worker and ask if they have them to set aside the supplies that you need. Woo woo.
All right. So, panelists, thank you. Providers and attendees, thank you. Stephanie, you're both a provider and a panelist today. It's wonderful to have you with us. Thank you so much. All of you, there are a few resources which you've seen every week, so I won't read back through them here today. You know, I alluded to the first one, and then there are some upcoming dates that we wanted to make you aware of there for action team meetings, as well as another Northern Lights training that you can see is there for June 18th. So we're going to sign off for now. As Brenda said at the outset, we're going to we'll post a date for one more webinar at least in June. If there are topics you want to hear about, if there are needs for this discussion that have, you know, are still unmet, let us know so that we can shape that curriculum for you all in the way that's going to be most helpful. In the meantime, take care of yourselves, stay cool. I'm going to be getting a sprinkler today on the way home because the creek that runs by my house is now officially dry, and there's nowhere to go to beat the heat out in Calais, Vermont. Thank you all, and take care.